Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Story of a Storyteller. And my guest today is Ross. Is he a spy or is he not young? How are you, Ross?
I'm good, and I'm not. But then I would say that, wouldn't I? So, okay.
Exactly. So we'll never really know, will we? Ross is the author of two books set in the one universe, the Gloomwood. Oh God, I wrote it down. I forget.
Yes.
Gloomwood.
No, you're right.
I always get something wrong. Usually it's someone's surname, but your surname is fine. So instead, I'll just get your books wrong instead. The first book is Deadheads, and the second book is Get Ted Dead, both of which we'll speak about later, Ross. But first, I'd like to know one thing that I have when I ask people to come onto the show. I get them to fill out a little questionnaire. And one of the questions is what's something you think is very interesting or unusual about you and your story. And you said that you've lived in 9 different countries, which is quite a lot. So could you tell me a bit about that?
Most of those countries are when I was growing up. So my parents, my dad in particular, worked abroad a lot, and we went to work there. And most of it is in the Middle East. And I struggle to do the list in order, but a lot of it was so we got Saudi, Dubai, Bahrain, Qatar, Malaysia, and then since then I've lived in Thailand and France and obviously the UK. I'm sure I've missed some when I said that, but basically it was being dragged around by my parents to different places. But then when I finished university, I did a couple of years of work in the UK, then a few more as I trained to be a teacher and worked there, and then decided to go abroad again. So I went over to Egypt, worked there for a few years, which was good fun. That was during the Arab Spring and stuff like that. So it was a pretty turbulent time.
Wow, yeah.
To be in Egypt. It looked like lots was happening on television, but for me it wasn't too involved. But it was exciting. But the Egyptian people were lovely. They were always very nice to us. Even when it was all going crazy, they always wanted to make sure everyone was okay. And then Thailand for the last 4 years after that, and now in France. So it's a mixture of my work and my parents' work that took me abroad, really. And it's been good. I appreciate the opportunities to get around places, learn a bit more about other cultures.
And so this is a funny question for that, but when someone asks you where you're from, like what do you say? Because you have a UK accent, but I mean that doesn't mean you necessarily identify as someone from the UK. Do you know? So if I asked you, oh, where are you from? What's your instinct to say?
Well, I am actually a Geordie. I don't sound like it. I've had that accent taken away from traveling around so much, but all of my family would say that they're from Newcastle, and I am from Newcastle, but it's a stretch, and I'm willing to admit that. So I normally qualify it. So people say, "Where are you from?" They say, "Oh, I'm from Newcastle," but you can't tell because I've lived all over the shop. So no one gets a straight answer. Is the answer to that question? You're not getting one either.
No.
It is a difficult one, but essentially, I'm from Newcastle, but I hide it very well.
So you're from Newcastle, but don't seem too proud of it.
No, I am. I really am. But I feel like genuine Geordies would be like, no, you're not. You weird posh idiot. So that's more of what it's about. Yeah, basically. So technically, I'm from Newcastle.
And so like moving around a lot, because I moved around a little bit as a kid as well. I was born in New York actually, and then when my younger brother was born, I was just due to start school, so my parents were like, "Oh, if he goes to school here, then he's an American, and do we want an American in the family?" So they moved quickly home, and we moved to Sligo first, and then eventually to where I am right now, actually, Manor Hamilton and Leitrim. But I moved schools a lot as a result. I was in 2 different schools, and one in Sligo, and then one school here. So I know how I feel about that. Like, how did you feel as a kid, and now as an adult looking back? How do you feel about having to move around so much as a child?
I actually, when I was a teacher, one of the things that I used to talk a lot about, and I actually presented about a couple of times, was this idea of what the term that's used most is third culture kids. So kids who have a different culture from the country that they are in, and the school that they are in, and the parents that they're in, and they basically move around a lot. And the transitions between schools are really quite interesting. For me personally, it's definitely had an effect on me. I don't know if it's a negative or a positive effect, and I'm not very good at judging that sort of thing. And I don't like to put it in those terms, but I know that it's meant that in terms of the kids, you know, people who say, "Oh, I've known so and so since we were at school together." I don't know anybody since we were at school together. I think I've got one friend that I'm occasionally in touch with, who was the best man at my wedding. That's the only person that I'm still in contact with from school. It being in so many schools and moving around so much. It's an interesting one. I think that there's a lot of positives to it as well as negatives to it. And I know that it can definitely have a negative effect on kids if they move a lot and they don't settle very well in places. But you learn to do that, and I'm quite lucky. I've got 3 brothers, so we've got that in common with each other. So we always had that unit mentality, if you like, of, well, okay, we're all going to move and we're all going to do this. And I'm a middle brother, so that means I always had the younger one to look after when we're in schools and stuff like that. And it helps a little bit, but I certainly think that it can make permanence a difficult thing to grasp. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no.
I know that one of the reasons we moved here is because I was actually very desperate to have a home. I'd reached a point, especially with my daughter being born, where I was like, I want to have a place that we call home, because that's quite an unfamiliar concept to me in some ways. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So your purpose, would you say you're purposely trying to not give your daughter the same childhood experience that you had by once she was born, you're like, right, I want there to be a permanent home. Like, are you purposely trying to avoid what you experienced as a kid, or is it just more you that's what you'd prefer her to have, like, if you know what I mean?
I don't know if there's I don't know if it was an intent about what I experienced growing up. I don't know if that has a bearing on it at all, but I know that I felt that it would be nice to have a more stable environment for her, certainly for her first few years. And I think that being in education as well makes us very conscious of moving around a lot. And I think that we decided that we would like her to be bilingual if possible, because it's a huge boon, a massive benefit. And with my wife being a fluent French speaker, it made sense to be here. Also, it's really expensive to buy houses in the UK, and we wanted to be able to afford our own home. So that was one of the reasons that we moved here as well. And there's lots more to it. It was complicated, but I don't think it probably did subconsciously matter to me that there was a permanent home in that respect, somewhere that you feel that you can always go back to. But at the same time, I'm not sure, it certainly wasn't conscious, but you've probably put hit the nail on the head, even though I probably don't want to admit it.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, to even whether it was subconscious or not, to choose to give your child a permanent place that, like, that's where I grew up, that's where I'm from, that's home, it doesn't mean that your childhood wasn't secure and safe either. It's just a different thing. Because I know I have friends that she's the same age as me, and she spent 10 years in one country, 10 years here in Ireland in one town, in this town where I grew up, and then 10 years in another place. And that's why I asked you, where do you think you're from? Because she's like, whenever people ask her that, she's like, I've been equally in 3 different places. I don't really know. So it's just very interesting. What do you think was the hardest part of moving around so much as a kid? And then now as an adult, do you find that same thing difficult when you move around?
Kids are very resilient. And I think that it's one thing that is said a lot, but also underestimated. Kids are also much better at making friends and getting on with things than people necessarily realize. But I think that it probably was quite difficult to start afresh every time, because you, especially when you're a teenager, when you're moving around and you're struggling to find your own identity yourself, to be moved around at that point in your life can be quite awkward, because you've got an idea in your head of who you are. You move to an entirely new place. Nobody has that idea in their head. So what do you do? Do you try and be someone a little bit different? And then going to new places, there are assumptions quickly made, especially if you're in a school with, as expat kids are, which is a word I don't really like, but they are in environments where everybody moves around a lot. And so everybody has to make quick assumptions and judgments of people. And I think that that's something that you learn to do. And as an adult, I know that I find it, especially when I was teaching more internationally, it's more difficult to, again, have that permanent relationship with people. Does that make sense? So I think that certainly I'm very lucky that I have been married for as long as I have, which means that we have a very much a bubble, and everyone's welcome to be outside the bubble, but within the bubble there are very few people that we are very close to, and I think we're quite happy with that. So there's probably that fear of getting burnt, I suppose, of in terms of relationships. That might be the toughest thing. There's certainly an element of change with how you view your relationships with other people when you move around a lot.
Yeah. I have a colleague who, her parents worked for the UN, and she spoke of something very similar, that you'd start in a new school and you'd start making friends, but there was always a thing in the back of your head going, my parents might be told tomorrow we have to move, or the friends I'm making might be moving tomorrow and not even know it yet either. Like, and it was very hard, I'd imagine, to, like, it was very easy to make friends on a superficial level, but I'd say it was very hard to make friends on a deeper level, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And you quickly learn the things that, what do I say here to quickly ingratiate myself with a crowd of complete strangers and stuff like that. And I think a lot of kids like that end up playing the clown a lot, which you will see a lot in schools. Those kids that move around the most often start off by being clowns, because it's the fastest way to build those relationships with other people as well, or that superficial relationship that you have with other people.
Yeah, or even just to get noticed and to get known.
Yeah, that's very true.
That. Was there any aspect then of yourself now that you can point to and say, I'm fairly confident that this part of my personality is because we moved around, and this part of my preferences and likes and dislikes is because I moved around?
I think that I'm not too bothered about whatever's currently popular, for the most part. So I think that the being pulled along by popular opinion isn't something that ever really affects me too much. And I know that I find it, I'm not very good at identifying, and I know the English and Americans are very good at this, of identifying this is English humor, this is American humor, and the crossover shows and stuff like that. I know that I don't really notice very often until afterwards. And I don't have the longing that some people have for this more, what's the word here? There's this feeling that a lot of people have where they really want to watch at some point something from when they were kids. Do you know what I mean? Nostalgia. We don't have this nostalgia for things that we had when we were young, as much as some people do. And I know that's about moving around a lot, and I know that's about not being exposed to some things that other people were. So there's funny things that come up every now and again. Like people around my age will be talking about kid shows that were on at the time, and I'm going, I didn't see any of that at all. So there's sudden gaps, and they only ever come up when you're in the midst of a conversation. You go, I've got no idea what that is. Everyone goes, what are you talking about? It was the biggest thing when we were all about 12 or 13 or something like that. I'm like, not for me. Just a complete blank. And I know that that's quite an interesting thing for some people. I think that there's also a lot more indoctrination that goes on than we realize in different countries. I don't mean that in a negative way, but we're certainly steeped in things that may not be recognized. Religion is a really big one. People that aren't religious at all are still quite heavily influenced by the religion of the place that they live in. And I've lived in so many different countries with different cultures and religions that it's water off a duck's back. And sometimes I'm confused quite easily by things that people are saying. And I'm like, oh wait, that's how I see now. That's because of this whole thing, right? Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But in terms of my personality, I certainly think that I'm quite confident in myself. I'm not too worried about making mistakes and screwing things up. But at the same time, I'm not very good at shouting for myself, if that makes sense. I'm quite happy in who I am. And I'm not afraid to try new things and stuff like that. And I think that that's something that comes from that. But I find showing off quite difficult, which I think I've said to people before. And that's a horrible way to put it. I don't mean showing off, but being confident about what you do. Happy to do anything. Yeah. That's not such a.
Unfortunately, as an indie author, is a really crucial skill.
And I'm trying really hard to get better at it. I really, really am. But the natural, and I don't know if this is a family trait or partly of that moving around a lot, but there's certainly the natural perspective I have on these things is to make fun of yourself rather than to be like, look at this, I'm awesome. Which would be nice to be able to do, I think. But yeah, I think I'm not sure where that's come from, but possibly from moving so much.
You touched on something there that I'd like to maybe explore a bit. You said about indoctrination, and we used religion as an example, but not necessarily all. Like, indoctrination isn't always religious. It's a cultural thing, and it's just religion is very tied to culture. So, is there anything that sticks out to you that you're like, wow, what people say and do that or think that you can pinpoint as that's from growing up in one culture all the time, if you know what I mean? Like, for one example I'm thinking of, like, I would consider myself an atheist, but I also grew up in Ireland, which mightn't be a very religious country anymore, but it's very culturally a Catholic country, to the point that if I lose something and can't find it, and then I find it, my first instinct is, oh, thank God. And I was like, but I don't believe in God. But I even struggle to think of another way to say that kind of sense of relief without saying thank God. So is there any things like that you're like, that you can think of?
There's not so many that I pick up on in that respect, but I know there are things that I picked up on that I'll occasionally say, where I'll get a funny look. So there's tiny smatterings of sayings that come from different cultures and things like that, or ways of behaving. But I know that I'm even given the typical stereotype of an English person, I can be ridiculously polite, painfully polite sometimes, and I know that I do that, and that's from moving around so much. But it's also when you're in a country where you don't speak too much of the language, being polite is one of the biggest ways that you communicate, because the first things most people learn is to say please and thank you in every language. So it's one of those things that you pick up, and because it can be one of those few things you can say when you first move somewhere new, you say them all the time. So you find yourself saying please and thank you all the time, and not every culture reacts the same way to that. And some people will look at you confused when you're thanking them for something that you wouldn't expect a thank you for.
Yeah.
I know that's something that I picked up on. But there are things. I mean, obviously a lot of time is in the Middle East, and so that they love the word inshallah, which is God willing, which really irritates some people from other cultures, because they're like, no, not God willing, just yes or no. And it's a really interesting one, because it doesn't mean what it sounds like it means. It's just something that basically sometimes to end a sentence, it can mean yes, that's definitely going to happen, and then they'll still say God willing, and then you get people who don't understand it, like, no, You just said definitely. Not God willing. That's like making excuses. It doesn't mean that, but it can feel like that. So it's a really interesting one. Because we're in our family, because we spent so much time there, we'll occasionally say that. The other ones, I'm just trying to think. Most recently was in Thailand before France, and they are. It's a very, very polite culture, and it's a culture where everybody smiles all the time, even when they're not happy. So yeah, that people refer to it as the land of smiles, but even when people aren't very happy, they will continue to smile. So that politeness comes through again, where it's very, very important. That space is kept. So in contrast to in the UK, people can be quite rude sometimes without realizing it, and certainly I think that people are becoming more abrupt. I think that maybe that's changing at the minute with what's going on the last year. I think that, but I certainly found I was quite surprised in my most recent trips back that sometimes at just how abrupt and rude people were sometimes. And I think that you've learned that the measures of these things in different cultures are very different. And they're changing all the time as well. So what might be the case one time, a decade later, you go somewhere, it's very different. And I think that's learning to pick up on those things quickly is quite an important skill that sometimes people underestimate. And that's why tourists in particular, in nearly every country, everyone just goes, tourist. It doesn't matter what country are you in, tourists is tourists, because they just haven't quite grasped the nuance of how people interact in different places. It's a really interesting one.
Yeah. So then when you go to a new country, or even just a place that has a slightly different culture to where you are based. So when you're going on a holiday, which, no one's been on one for a while now with COVID and everything. When you go on holiday, can you pick up on cultural things quicker so you don't stick out as a tourist because you're so used to searching for those things, do you think? Or are you still like, another tourist?
I think I'm still like, another tourist. I don't think that can really. I think that when you go on holiday somewhere, then you just accept that you're going there as a tourist. I know that we do. They're like, okay, we're going to go somewhere. We're going to stick out like a sore thumb, like all the other tourists, but that's okay because it's a short trip. And I think that there's part of me that thinks that pretending or trying to be something else can be disingenuous, and it can almost be more irritating to some people. If you're dealing with tourists day in and day out, and you get someone who's trying to pretend they're not a tourist, still going to make half the same mistakes, but they're going to be at that irritating level of you haven't steeped yourself in the culture. You've been here for 2 days. It's a package weekend, But it's an interesting one. But I definitely think that we just go with the app. We're just going to have to be tourists. We're going to have to accept it, and that's fine because it's a different experience, and it can be a lot of fun to just go there knowing that you have no idea what's going on without trying really hard to fit in. It takes time. I don't think you can say you've lived somewhere until you've been there for a good length of time and really have those nuances. And the holiday is not going to cut that for me anyway.
Yeah. We should have a disclaimer. This is all Ross Young's opinion. It's okay if you disagree. It's fine. So let's pivot a little bit then into storytelling and how you got into that. So what was the earliest story you remember creating or telling or making up?
I don't have a great memory from when I was younger, but the first one that I can remember in school was actually when I lived in the South in the UK for a couple of years, and we had a competition. There was two things in the same year. I think it must have been year 7 or year 8. There was one of those books, that schools get you to. Everybody writes a poem, and then you have a published book, and here you go, and everyone got published. One of those. It was one of those that I was in, and I remember that I'd written a poem called "The Football Match," and it was very descriptive about a football match. It was only afterwards. I don't think it was just our school. I think it was like the area or something like that. Like local education authority or something, and it was in there. And I remember my English teacher being very, very impressed, and then I had to go actually. I can't remember ever going to a football match, so I made it all up. Which they weren't impressed by, but it got in there. So that was probably the first one. So yeah, 7 or year 8. And then the same year, we had a competition in school to write a story. You could do it however you want. And I remember doing mine as a comic, and drawing it all and painting all the boxes. And I did it with paints and stuff like that. And my friend did it as well. And his was awesome. Mine was terrible. It was terrible because I put so much effort into it. They gave me some sort of consolation prize, while his won everything. I remember that and thinking, this is awesome, and then putting it down, putting it next to his, and going, oh man. But yeah, those are the earliest things that I can remember. I think I'm sure there were times before that. There was definitely a time in primary school where a student teacher came in and we were doing. She was a drama teacher, and she was doing. I know when I was doing my teacher training, we had 2 weeks in a primary school. So I was their secondary teacher. So I think she was probably doing that. And she came in, but she was doing it more like once a week or something like that for a longer period of time. So she'd do her drama lessons. I know that she had us making up our own plays and stuff like that.
Okay.
And she brought me in, which was now I think is a little bit strange because I was a year 6 kid. And she brought me in the script she had of Monty Python and Spike Milligan stuff, which I thought at the time that this is really cool. And now I think I was in year 6. You know, that's quite advanced stuff to give to a year 6 student. It was like, here's some Monty Python scripts, but still, it was cool. So I did some stuff there.
Let me just do my maths. Year 6 would be like
10 or 11.
10, 11, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So interesting. But yeah, that definitely can't remember any further back that, except for getting into trouble a lot. I was in trouble a lot.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Which everybody gets in trouble a bit, but I think that was part of moving around a lot again. So as you said, being the clown and stuff like that.
I think I went the opposite way. I was a bit of a goody two shoes in primary school, and then when I got to secondary school, I just got a little bit too confident.
Yeah.
I have no idea why.
I can't imagine that at all, really. You know.
I know. Yeah, imagine that. What now? Because we're going to start talking a bit more about writing now. What do you think? I mean, you mentioned the drama teacher that brought Monty Python into your life, and I can definitely see elements. Not even just I can see a little tiny bit of an influence in the kind of humor, especially because on Twitter you do the VSS and the very short stories, and they are always that very kind of skit, kind of short, snappy, blink and you miss it kind of humor. So do you think there's anything else like that influenced your storytelling style?
Definitely. I mean, I was a big fan of sketch shows, and I still am. Sketch shows, comedy sketches, both radio and television. I think it's brilliant. That kind of snapshot that can tell you so much. And comedy is a huge influence. And I've actually been toying with. I've written more serious work with less of the humor in it, and I do enjoy doing it. I haven't really published anything like that, except for a few shorts. But I think that kind of comedy is a fun one to write because timing when you're writing something is very different from comedic timing when you're saying something or acting something out. And I read a lot of comedy writers and try to read more and more at the same time. But it's also something that's very subjective. And that's quite a difficult thing. And I know a lot of people debate whether or not comedy is easy or difficult. I think it comes to people naturally or it doesn't. And it's very difficult with writing in particular for that, because there is people who write things to be funny, and there's people that write comedy because they like the twist in it that causes the smile. I like the twist in it. It's not, never sit down and go, right, I'm going to write something funny. And I think that would be terrible. I think I'd be awful at trying to write something because I think it would be funny, which is weird because most of what I write is obviously comedy. So when I sit down and write it, it's more like, right, what's the idea? How can I play with this? And I do actually, I don't know if it's one of those things again where when they say, I don't know if this is a bit sad, but it's not. I write comedy. I should do this. I read about the theory behind it as well.
Oh, okay.
And the theory behind comedy is a really interesting thing. What makes people laugh? And there's a lot to it. But I think I completely lost what your question was in the first place. But the reason that I think that I enjoy writing it is because of two things. One, you can make it very small, like the VSS. You can write something funny, a very small amount, and the more that you pack in, the more interesting it is. And for me, I think that those VSS, the size of a tweet, is a really good size for a very short sketch. That's when I first stumbled upon it, and I started writing them a lot about a year ago, and I write 2 or 3 of those a day normally, because they keep me thinking. And what it does for me is it helps with dialogue, and it helps with the relationships between characters. Because when you, in my books, the thing that I enjoy writing the most is the dialogue and where I get the most across. But writing comedy in a book and saying this book's funny is a horrible task, because to tell someone, look, you'll like this book because it's funny, is not the same as saying to someone, you like this book, it's an adventure, it's got loads of action in it, it's got loads of I don't know, it's got a romantic element to it.
Yeah,
this is funny.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I find that really difficult, especially as an indie writer who's trying to market their work. Going, look, it's funny, and then people go, no, is it? Is it though? So comedy's
to be.
it's really interesting. What did you ask me in the first place before I started rambling?
No, this is fine. You're actually accidentally answering the next question, so it's perfect.
Oh, I have to guess your questions now. This
yeah. Tell you what, I'll just ask one question and you answer the next one instead. No, I had asked you about like what things have influenced your storytelling style, but I think you've more or less said that. But that is one thing I find very, I don't want to say confusing, very foreign to me, is writing comedy. Just because I think I couldn't be funny to save my life. I've been told I'm very funny, and I always disagree.
Wow, very funny.
And it's just, I don't know. So like, what is your process? You kind of said it there, I suppose. But so you said that you don't sit down to write something funny. It just kind of becomes funny as you're writing it. So then you've also written serious stuff, as you said it. So like things that aren't comedy, I suppose is a better way to say it. So do you then have to kind of purposely try and avoid comedy when you're writing something more serious?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I consciously think, right, okay, I'm not allowed to write anything funny. Because there can be humor in things without them being comedy, if that makes sense. And I would say that the very, very short stuff I write is just straight comedy most of the time. There's an occasional poignant one that I'll throw in there just to keep people on their toes. But if I'm writing a story, a longer form story, whether it's a short story, novella, or a novel, then the most important thing isn't the comedy, it's the story. And if I choose for the tone to be comedic, that's fine. But the underlying story, and this applies to, as much as I make them sound silly, to Deadheads and Get Dead, there's some, they're pretty dark, deliberately dark subjects.
Yeah.
And the whole of it is, if you dwell on them for too long, then terrifyingly dark in some ways, if you overthink them. And that's why they are smothered with the interaction, the dialogue, where most of the humor comes in. silly incidents, but it's not often that has a huge impact on the story, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So that writing a sketch, you can go, oh, well, I personally find I can just go, right, okay, here's a joke, basically. But writing a novel, you can't write 90,000 words of dragging out a joke.
Yeah.
I don't think, anyway. I've seen people try, and I have read books that have attempted it. But I think that's if your entire novel is just one long punchline, then something's gone wrong with the plot. Where's the story? And we can argue about it in any way you want, but there is always an underlying plot that has to be developed, that has to be changed to your characters, and your character doesn't change because something funny happened to them necessarily. So it's losing your questions every time. It's a difficult one. I do this a lot. I have a terrible memory. I'll just start talking and then I'll just keep going.
I'm Conor, by the way.
Well, what was the question that
time? The question that time was, hello, how are you? No, I'm only joking. It was just like, do you purposely avoid comedy when you're trying to write something serious? And I suppose your short answer is no, but like just when you were talking there, I was thinking, I was just like, you're right in the sense of a tweet or a sketch is a joke. That's it. That's fine. But when you're writing novels, you're writing a novel that has jokes in it, as opposed to the comedy coming first. So the analogy I came up with in my head, and you can tell I haven't eaten yet today, was a burger. So the story.
It's not a great start, Conor. I've got to be honest.
Let me finish. Let me finish. It gets good, I swear. So like, if you ask me for a burger, I can give you a burger. But if you ask me for a cheeseburger, it's like I have to put a layer on top of that to make it into the thing it is. But it still has the meat being the story. It still has the plot. It still has the characters. It still has a beginning, middle, end. Top bun, meat, the bottom bun. But then when you put in the toppings, it changes what type of burger it is. So it's kind of like every good book has to have the beginning, middle, end, has to have the meat, has to have the story, the characters. But if you want it to be a gritty, dark novel, you need to put in the darkness, you need to add in the violence and the horror. If it's a comedy, you need to add in the funny bits and do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, it's not that bad an analogy actually. It's pretty good. I'll let you have it.
It's meh. Let's be honest. I'm just hungry.
I don't disagree. I think that my novels are certainly not. I would call them fantasy with comedy rather than comedy with fantasy. So I think you're quite right. The comedy element is certainly a source. I'm not going to quite put it that way. But yeah, it's the tone. It's the tone that it's put in. Yeah. So it's delivered in a way that's meant to be fun and a bit silly rather than very, very dark. But that's for the most part, it's these bits that are sprinkled on top afterwards that change that tone. I'm not sure what they'd be like if you took out all of the comedy. It'd be an interesting one. Short, I'd imagine.
Well, I'm thinking like if you think of like the only book that's coming to my head at the minute that you'd call a classic comedy book would be Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So if you look at that, if you take out the daftness and the funny and everything, you still have a pretty good adventure sci-fi story. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's still a comedy novel can't be comedy. Well, it can be comedy first, but it can't be a good novel and be comedy first, I don't think.
I don't think that you can start off with the jokes.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. And I can be wrong. At the end of the day, I'm not... some of the prolific comedy writers out there may have a very different opinion, but I don't think that you can begin with the jokes. I think you begin with the story and then decide that you're going to make it a comedy tone. And that's when you start messing with things. I know that there's a fine line that I feel that I walk between complete absurdist comedy where it's ridiculous, and the more nuanced stuff that will make you laugh but doesn't take away from the power of the situation you put your characters in, or that they get themselves in. So there's a big difference between the two, and I think that there is, and this is the one things where I'm not sure. Comparisons are very difficult, and people make comparisons a lot, and I think that's even harder in some ways with books that are difficult to put into genres. Like, I don't think mine are the easiest to put into a genre. It's definitely fantasy, and it's definitely funny, but it's a fantasy noir. Is it a straight fantasy? Is it a comedy? Is it a satire? And all those things are quite difficult to necessarily put things into. So you get these comparisons with other people and with other work that's out there. And like you said earlier, like something like Monty Python, I personally don't really see that much. There is an influence of that, but Monty Python is so huge that they will influence lots of things.
Yeah.
But I would consider that much more absurdist than most of what I would write. But my shorts are probably more in that realm than my novels. And I think that I often think about what would you do if you were to make something into a comedy that's already written, and most people would make it more absurd. So you take a popular book that's out there and you would just you would stretch it into being ridiculous. And I don't know if I do that in that same way. So I don't think I've turned my books into comedy. I think that they naturally, the tone is that way. Does that make sense? That's quite a confusing way to put it.
Yeah. So speaking of your books, I haven't got around to reading them yet. As I said in our Dungeons and Dragons episode, which to be fair,
hang up on you.
To be fair to anyone watching this when it releases, the Dungeons and Dragons episode was a while ago for people watching it, but it was only like a week and a half ago between recordings. So
yeah,
let's be fair. I don't want to seem like a horribly unsupportive writer friend. But like, so you chose to write in a very unusual setting of what you have dubbed Gloomwood. So could you tell me a bit about like where Deadheads started and how you got the idea, and like, because it's such an unusual setting and such an unusual story from what I know of.
Okay, so I think it's a long time ago that I started writing Deadheads, so a decade ago, and that's more than a decade ago. I've just realised. Anyway, I think that it started out as a story. Well, I know that it started out when I was toying with the idea of Reapers and death, and Reapers is a very popular area to play around in. They're an interesting and ill-defined element of lots of mythology, so that they can be easily played with, and you can do some great things with them, and very imaginative things. Some people have some fantastic ideas of what to do with them. And I started toying around with that, and I had the whole system for what actually happened to a soul, and how it was captured, and why Reapers would do it, and stuff like that. Some of which I've hung on to. But the more that I developed these ideas, the more I realized that I was more interested in Grim, the Grim Reaper. And then I think that I started to wonder a lot more about what if somebody has all of the time in existence, which he does because he's death, then, and people always say, well, he's really busy, but he's not really busy. He's got all of the time. We're only going to be around for so long. His time is infinite. And he's going to get bored eventually. And what does he do with all of this time? And I went down that pathway, and then I realized that I think that it's just something that has so many opportunities to shine a light on our world, if you like, without existing in our world, and the things that would be different. And now I was a scientist. That was my background. So I was a science teacher and a psychology teacher, which is quite an interesting, weird combination. And I think that the more that I thought about it, the more that I had Blunt dying. I had a story where he read and he found out who he basically solved a crime, and then instead of succeeding in saving the day and being the hero, he died at the end of it. So the villain got away with it. And I realized that was a bit of a crappy ending to a story. As much as I liked it, because I was like, oh, that's different. People won't see that coming. And I thought, well, people won't see it coming because nobody wants to read that. Nobody wants to hear about the failed hero where everything went wrong. So I wrote that, and then I thought, right, now I've got Blunt, who I really like as a character, the horrible person, and I quite like that about him. He really isn't a very nice. He's an anti-hero, and I was like, okay, so now he's dead. What could be the worst thing that could happen to him? Oh, he still has to go to work tomorrow. That would be the worst thing that would happen. If he died, the worst thing that could happen, he has to go to work tomorrow. And then with all of those things coming together, I work on a lot of things at the same time. And I think that I realized that they all fit really well into one place, which is Gloomwood, which is the Grim Reaper's afterlife. And he has made it, well, I don't want to give too much away, but it's his afterlife, and it's there for a reason. And it means that I have the opportunity to explore the human world, our world, the living world, and twist it as much as I like. And no one could tell me that I'm wrong, because nobody's ever going to go. Yeah.
Very, very good. You touched on something there that is my next question. So Deadheads came out 11 years ago, and Get Ted Dead came out a couple of weeks ago now. So why has there been why was there such a gap, and was that an intentional thing, or was that just like what's the story there? Did you mean for there to be a gap, or was it just you focused on other things during that time?
I think that there was a lot of reasons for it. But a lot of them are real world reasons. It's real life gets a hold of you and gets in the way of things. I didn't really know what I was doing when I released Deadheads. So I released it to the world, and lots of people had praise for it who read it. But I think that for me, I think I was gripped quite badly by imposter syndrome. And I think that possibly releasing it, putting it out there, I mean, it was professionally edited. It was well received by those who'd read it, people who I didn't know who'd read it, which is the key. Because if you get people that you know that read it and tell you it's great, you don't believe them. But that all came back, and then I think that I wasn't going quick enough to capitalize on that momentum, and then it fades away after a little while, especially if you're not marketing your book, you're not getting it out there. And I think for a little while, I didn't stop writing. There's loads and loads of work that I've done, and I'm definitely a very different writer than I was when I released Deadheads. I'd hope a better writer. God,
I was really about to ask a better writer, right?
Yeah, I really hope a better writer, because God help us if I'm not. But I think that there was definitely a big loss in confidence in some ways. And also I completely screwed myself over, because I put the blurb for Get Ted Dead in the back of Deadheads, because I was so confident about what I was going to be doing next at the time. And I hadn't grasped yet that I just basically made a massive error, and said, I'm going to write this book. And then I hadn't written it, which is a terrible idea, because then everyone who had read it, and there was quite a lot of pressure on from some people who were getting quite irate. So long ago now, they've all forgotten, but they were getting quite irate that the next book wasn't coming out anytime soon. And I think that I really put myself in a situation where the pressure plus imposter syndrome meant that I really was never feeling confident in anything that I wrote to follow up with from Deadheads. But in the last year, like I said, it was written several times over. But in the last year, I think that I have been in touch with a lot more writers like yourself.
Yeah.
via Twitter and talking to a lot more people, reading a lot more indie books as well. And it's given me a little bit more confidence in my own abilities and in my own ability to judge, which is the thing you can really get lost on, especially as an indie writer. If you're reading your work and then all you're reading is trade published work, and you're looking at that and you're thinking, I'm missing something here. I don't understand the pieces that I'm missing. Talking to people that are doing the same thing as you, reading other people's work with a much more critical eye helps. And you've got to, when you get feedback, you can't leave it for 10 years before deciding whether or not you agree with it, which is kind of what I was doing to a point. So I was getting lots of feedback and I was going, well, that's great to get the feedback. And then not being confident enough to say, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, I agree with this, I don't agree with this. And I think that was a big issue. So there's lots of things there. There was confidence, there was never quite feeling the story fit. And I certainly think that a big element was you writers like to pretend that we do everything on our own, and we're full of shit because we don't do it on our own at all. Even if it's just getting other people's ideas, even if it's just listening to what other people are going through with their writing, it makes a huge difference. And that's true of everything. And I think in the last year, I grew up a little bit and said, you know what, stop doing it by yourself. Actually find out what's going on. And that made a huge difference to me. And even writing those VSS online and seeing people going, hey, you know what, this is actually quite good. This is quite funny. That helped a lot. So that 10-year gap I was basically me being a bit of a dick and just not taking on board feedback and not being confident enough to just go, you know, I'm just going to bash this out and do it. And like I said, real life, the world and time, when you're confident about doing something, you can carve out that time to do it. If you're second guessing doing it in the first place, then you'll find something else to do where you do feel confident doing it. So I think there's definitely an element to that as well. So you've got to believe in what you're doing in order to carve out that time. And people like to pull that. If you really love doing something, you'll find the time to do it no matter how busy you are, which is true, unless you really love doing something, but you're also frightened or not confident enough to believe that what you're doing is the right way. So it's dangerous to oversimplify these things. Weirdly though, there was never writer's block.
Oh really? Because I'll be honest, that is what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was a case of you just hadn't a clue what to write, and you just kept.
No, not at all. And that's and in some ways that's more frustrating. Honestly, I never stopped writing. It was like, I'm not kidding. I can open actually, I think it's on my old laptop. But if I open my Google Drive now and just had a look at the number of files, there's at least 30 versions of that book just in my Google Drive. There are characters in there. There's at least 3 books that have no characters in it at all that are in the current book.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's there, but it's fantastic for world building. So I'm not writing it off and being like, oh, it's a disaster that I didn't get it done. But the fact is that I wasn't ever quite feeling like it made sense. And then this last year was also a lot of coalescing of different ideas. And I sound like a management speak. There's a real synergy of my ideas and a lot of thinking. Went from being very binary to much more gray. No, it was really a lot about learning about what I was doing and accepting the fact that maybe I'm not a pantser after all. I thought I was for a long time. And I think that I need more direction in that in my planning. And I learned a lot this year about writing.
So what was the catalyst then that made you say, screw it, I'm gonna release Get Ted Dead?
This time, I think it was the fact that people said they wanted to read it, and it didn't feel like before when people said that. When people said it before, it made me think like, oh no, that they're getting at me to write this. And not that they weren't, they were being encouraging. It's about your perspective on these things.
It's about, yeah, it's about the internal filter you have. Like, it's a one sentence can have a completely different meaning depending on your kind of filter and how you look at things. So
Exactly.
just because people were saying to you, "Oh, I can't wait to read your next book," at one stage in your life, you seem to have taken that as, "Oh, they're nagging me to write, and I don't want it. I'm not ready." Whereas then then later on it becomes a, "Oh wow, they enjoy my writing and they want to see more of me."
Yeah, and I think that definitely came more this year. I think at the start of, well, it's over a year ago now. I did Nanowrimo, and people have lots of different opinions on Nanowrimo. I do it. I attempt to do it pretty much every year. I find it's a really good tool for motivating me to get more done. And Camp Nano as well, which goes on earlier in the year. They're just, people have very mixed opinions about these things, but for me, it's very simple. Other people are also trying to do it. Community and working together and all of these things are very, very powerful in terms of motivation. And we all need extra motivation sometimes. So that's all it is for me. It's a brilliant motivational tool. It's a huge error to ever just do NaNoWriMo and then think, I've done my book, I can walk away now, or release this to the world. That's a massive mistake. Don't ever believe that. But if it's in terms of building that community and getting people around you that are trying to do the same thing, then it's brilliant. So doing that about, well, not this November just gone, but the November before. And I was writing something completely different. I was writing, I decided that I would try and write something really bad to see whether or not I could write something really bad and if what I was writing was actually good. So I deliberately went and wrote something really bad, which I quite like. It's about a, it's some really bad science fiction thing about a guy that lives on a space station, and it's terrible. It's really, really terrible. But I proved to myself that I can write something really, really bad.
So terrible, you completely forgot the plot.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm trying. I really am struggling to remember it. It's okay. His name was Curse as well, to make it even worse. Okay, so the character's name was Curse or something like that, and he lived on a space station, and his space station exploded, but he escaped because he ran an intergalactic taxi service. See, you can tell it was good already. Anyway, so I was writing this just as an exercise, and I pour out as much as I can, as quickly as I can. And while I was doing that, I was talking to other people, and those other people were like, "Oh, what else have you written?" And then somebody picked up my book and they read it, and I was like, they really liked it. And I was like, "Oh, okay. I need to. I've started something here. I need to see what's going on." I got more into the writing community again. And I just went, what have I been doing? I could have been way ahead of the game here if I just stuck with what I was doing 10 years ago. And now I've just shot myself in the foot. People are actually liking to read this. So I went through my most recent drafts and started rewriting from scratch with all of the things I'd already done. So I could pick and choose the elements that I wanted to do. And what I found was that the editing came much easier than it had done before. So my personal editing, and the planning came together much more nicely, which I tried a few times before. And what I was much more confident doing was getting to a certain point in the story, and rather than going, no, and shoving it all away, was going, okay, you've gone the wrong way. Go back to where it was the right direction. And instead of going, this is because I did that a lot. Instead of following the story and going, it doesn't make any sense, and starting from scratch, going, trace it back to where it stopped making sense and just get rid of that and carry on. And I think that's it. It's a more difficult thing that people don't talk about very much. That you shouldn't edit while you go. But if you go down a plot hole, crawl back to where the plot hole went and then go back in the right direction. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not the same thing as editing as you go if you're writing the story for the first time. And there's a danger of going down a plot hole and going, I've got to dig my way back up from this, and staying instead of walking back. And I learned a lot about that. I learned a lot about recognizing the mistakes I was making, which were making things difficult for myself.
So on that then, would you consider yourself someone who the most popular version of it is a plotter or a pantser, but I don't particularly like those words. I prefer a gardener or an architect. So would you when you were again, I mean, you've wrote it so many times, but when you were writing Get Ted Dead, which is surprisingly difficult to say quickly. I don't know why. Um, what are you? What did you do? Did you plot it, or did you kind of write as you go?
I I'm going to annoy you and every plotter and pantser as well, as I'm in between. So
Yeah.
an enthusiastic DIYer. I have a plan, but it's quite a vague plan. And what I try to do, what I did originally try to do was write chapter by chapter. But if you read my books, you'll find that my chapters don't make a lot of sense either, because I like to increase the pace as I write, and so I play with a lot of the usual rules around things like chapters and stuff like that. I play with them quite a lot, and the last, I think, 10 chapters in Get Ted Dead and in Deadheads is the same, are extremely short, and they actually get shorter and shorter and shorter as you get to the end of the novel, intentionally, because we jump. In terms of a film, it would be jumping very quick shot from scene to scene and character to character. So it doesn't really work. So if I tried to plot it by chapters, so then I started doing it by beats, which is a bit like the save the cat method, but I don't quite go that far. So I believe in setting where they are now to begin the story. So I knew what I was doing there, and I can write that out. Okay, what I need to put everyone exactly where they are now. We'll put that there. Now I know what's going to happen and who is in danger, and I need to make sure I've introduced everyone while we're in this space. Then next is where we're going to hit mid-level climax. So what is that? And I had these all defined clearly in my head, but I don't believe in putting my characters in places. I believe in them getting there for reasons of their own. And that's a difficult bit, because then I can only coax them in that direction. So I'll set where they are. I know where they need to be at different points. And all I can do is try to put things in their way to make them go in those directions. And that's kind of how it works. So I call it a scaffold, if you like, a rough sketch of what's going on. And then I'm coloring in between.
Coloring in between. It was George R. Martin was the first person I heard refer to them as gardener and architect, and I'd be the same as you. I would be a little bit in between, a lot more to the architect side. So because I liked both terms, I coined the term. I'm a landscape architect. I plan the garden, but it's still a garden, so things might still.
Definitely sounds better than my enthusiastic DIY. I'll give you that.
Listen, same thing. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. All names are equal and valid. No, because I know, because when you were talking about the getting into a plot hole, and sometimes the instinct is to write your way out of it instead of just dropping all and going back a bit. What I tend to do when that happens to me, and it happens quite a lot, is I it's something I didn't realize until until I was writing my current book, which is my fourth book to write. That I always write with 3 point of view characters, and yeah, and it's something I've only just like, oh yeah, I do that. Like once it was my partner said it to me, I was like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that. So in the current book, which is a kid's book, there was 1 point of view character that was in a plot hole, and I was there like pulling my hair, going, how am I going to fix this? How am I going to make it work? I need her to get from here to there. And I just dawned on me, I was like, well, I know where she needs to get, so why don't I just put her there right now and just forget that bit, and I'll fix that later. Like, you don't have to write it as you go. You don't have to write it in order. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Very true. And that's a really difficult thing, which I struggle with, is not keeping to the linear aspect of things when you're writing. And actually, this was the first time, Get Ted Dead was the first time where I decided I was going to write something from later in the book. And it was in the last 10%. I hesitate to call it the ending because stuff happens after it, but it was basically for me, it was what I was aiming for. And I didn't hit the wall, but I wrote that, and then I went, right, okay, now I know where I'm going and what's supposed to be happening. And it brought everything back into place. The loose ends that were starting to get off, I was like, well, I don't need you, so throw it out. And I do go in a lot of directions. I hope what it comes out like is like it's all nicely woven together. What actually happens is I have basically a tangled mess, and I have to try and pull out all of the threads, so it makes sense. But definitely that idea of being able to jump forward, or just to put someone where they're supposed to be, and then it'll make sense afterwards. It's a very difficult thing to get your head around, especially as I don't think it's anything that you ever really encounter elsewhere in life. So, except maybe as teachers do when you're planning your lesson, you do sometimes go, okay, that's where they need to be. Now, how the hell am I going to get them from there to there? So I suppose that is one way where you do that a little bit.
And the other thing, and I hope I don't come across as a bad teacher, and I hope every teacher has experienced this, but when you're in the middle of a lesson and you have it really well planned and you think it's going to be great, and the kids just aren't getting it, and they just don't have a clue what you're talking about, and you just go, right, never mind, let's go out and do PE.
I don't know what you're talking about, Conor. That's never happened to me.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, great. Okay, bye, Ross.
No, that's exactly it. I'm going, this isn't working. I need to put this all to one side and do something that makes more sense. Definitely to a degree. It's very, very similar to that. And I think that sort of thinking is probably why a lot of teachers end up writing. It's a similar mindset, certainly.
Yeah, I've had a shocking amount of teachers on this podcast accidentally. Not that I'm avoiding teachers, but it's just I'll bring someone on and then find out they were or are a teacher at some point, and I'm like, oh, okay, here's another one. Let's go. So we'll just move on towards last bit. While my dog growls, she's been growling throughout this entire interview. I'm going to edit it out, but for anyone. Not hearing the growling.
I think it's me in the background going,
it's me. You're answering the question. I'm like, oh no.
Here he goes again. He didn't even listen to what I said.
What?
Never mind. Go on.
Sorry.
Yeah. I thought you weren't funny. Come on, carry on.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm quick like that. But that's my point. If people say, "Oh, you are funny," I'm like, "No, this is just who I am." And then when I try to be funny, everything fails. If I'm trying to make you laugh, I will fail. So my last questions, anyway, to wrap us up, while my dog sits so high on my lap, I can't even be seen on camera. What's the first thing? These are the questions I ask everyone at the end of every interview. So what's the first thing you're going to do after our interview today?
Get a drink, because I talk so much that I get really bad dry mouth. It always happens to me on podcasts, or when we were doing the Dungeons and Dragons thing as well. It was very much like, I can't speak anymore. So yeah, the first time I do, I didn't even mean a drink. I literally just meant a glass of water.
It's liquid.
Yeah, just liquid. That's the first thing I'm going to do.
Very good. Very, very simplistic and very human. What goals do you have now as a writer?
I really want to get another Gloomwood book out before the end of this year, because they're all there.
Yeah, he says before the end of this year. Today being the 3rd.
Oh yeah, no, not before the end. I
assume you mean 2021.
Yeah, I'm assuming that this isn't going out today. So I was. I want to get something out before the end of this year. I want to write a short as well, possibly novella length story, that kind of introduces some of the main characters, which I can hopefully use in terms of marketing, because I've been reading a lot about marketing and realized I'm doing it wrong. That's everything I've learned so far. This is incorrect. I'm going to hopefully be a bit better at that. I said I have a lot of things going on at once. I like to flip from project to project. I need to cull a few projects and decide what I'm focusing on. And hopefully with that will come a few more reviews, a bit more interest, a few more sales. And I'm thinking that at some point this year, I'll maybe try and write something to submit to agents in the future, which is outside of the Gloomwood universe. Yeah. But that, like I said, it's all a bit up in the air right now. That's come up a lot this week of what are your plans for next year? It's the time of year where it happens.
Time of year, anyway.
I'm going to go, yeah, no, I can't fit that into a tweet. Have you got an essay I can submit or something?
No, but I have a podcast, so
you have, so and I can ramble as much as I like. Apparently, this time at least I remembered what the question was, which is good. So yeah, there's a lot on the plate, but the main goals I think are to write a third book. I hesitate to say in the series because I'm very keen on them being standalone if they can be. And so a third book and a novella length book. Well, a novella length book. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A novella length novella before the end of the year, next year, not this year.
2021.
It'll be this year when you're listening to this.
Yes.
That's confusing, isn't it? Yeah.
I know, yeah. It's really confusing because I always record the intro and outro after the interview, but before it releases. So I'm always like, do I talk? And then at the start, I'm always like, so in this episode, I'm going to be talking to Ross Young, whereas I've already talked to you like weeks before I record the intro. So it's very, time is an illusion. It doesn't matter. It's not real. It's fine. Do you have any goals then that you'd like to share that have nothing to do with writing?
I don't know about goals. I have a few ideas that are not writing related, but other projects I'd like to do that are writing related. So I have an idea for a sitcom idea that I've been wanting to write for a little while, which I started a while ago. And I had a few ideas for other things. So I had an idea for a sketch-like podcast that used the VSS that people do on Twitter, which I thought would be good fun. But I'm struggling to find a way that I could do that with just me. And at the same time, I don't know of anyone that would be too interested in getting involved in it. So there's other little bits and pieces around that I'd like to have a look at exploring. I'd like to be able to find a way to get stuff a little bit more exposure as well. Not meaning just the Gloomwood stuff, but in general, I'd like to write in a few more things. So looking at competitions and stuff. It's all very writing related at the minute. In terms of stuff at home, we're quite content, which is why we came here, which is nice. So just looking after the little one and carrying everything on, finding the time to do stuff elsewhere.
Good. That's a very easy thing to do, that they say. Finding time to do stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's hardly a goal though, is it? Finding time, which we just said doesn't exist anyway.
Yeah. So actually that's a lofty goal. Find something that doesn't exist. Anyway,
sure then.
Ross, could you tell anybody that's watching or listening where they can find you and your books and all that kind of stuff online?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at InkDisregardIt. Yeah, it's a really weird handle, I know. Or you can find my website. It is rossyoung.ink, which is INK, not INC, which I realized the other day is confusing. Incorporated, but it's not. It's just ink, as in a pen, ink. But it is confusing, apparently.
I like, to be honest, wouldn't have thought it was confusing just because I know you as Ink Disregarded on Twitter. So then I was like, Ross.ink, of course it's ink. But now I'm like, oh no way, outside of that, yeah, people would think INC. But anyway.
I can't remember who asked me the other day. Somebody did. And that really threw me. I was like, well, obviously, no. Why would you know that? You would think it was incorporated, definitely. You can find me on Amazon, the books on Amazon. Just type in Deadheads. And you'll find loads of other things also called Deadheads, but my book's there somewhere. Or Goodreads, you can find me there as well. That's pretty much all the places.
Fantastic. Yeah. And there'll be links to all that in the YouTube description and in the show notes for the your podcast app or wherever you're looking. And if you're listening on Spotify, which is something I only realized recently, if you're somebody that listens to this podcast or any podcast on Spotify, you can't look at the show notes that the podcast our podcasters
I listen on Spotify. I didn't know
put in. So be sure to go to storyofastoryteller.buzzsprout.com, because then you'll find the show notes there as well. And then finally, my last question, Ross, and then I'll let you go, is what was the last book you read?
Oh, you've really thrown me there. Oh, it was Halo Scott's book, Echoes of Blood.
Ah, very good. Very, very good.
Yeah, which is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. She is a phenomenal author. Please go and read her books. And then give it some time before you read mine, because they're very different and I don't want to be judged by it. Okay.
That's fair. That's fair. Ross, thank you so much for doing this. It's been great having you on and great to get to know you a little bit better too.
It's been great fun. Thank you very much, Conor, for having me on. Really appreciate it.
No bother.